Shall we get started?
Yeah, take us away, Ron.
Okay, cool. So yeah, thanks all for joining us today, and we're going to be going through creating an open research website and sharing that with folks. I'm Rowan Cockett. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Curvenote, and we also have Steve who's on the call. Maybe you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, my name is Steve Purvis. I'm CTO and co-founder of Curvenote also.
Awesome. And Steve will be jumping in. There'll be quite a bit of live demos today, and Steve will hopefully jump in and summarize some of the stuff that you're seeing while I'm doing a tiny bit of coding. So today, or just a little bit of background about Curvenote. Curvenote creates authoring tools for science and research teams that integrate directly with computational notebooks. And our goal is really to improve and accelerate the speed of scientific communication and the quality of scientific communication. And so that's really what we're going to be talking about today, is about creating open research websites from especially computational content like Jupyter Notebooks. But if you don't know Jupyter Notebooks, there's a lot in here as well for you about sharing. And so I'm going to start by asking a couple questions of what people are excited about when they think about open research websites. And then I'll dive right in with sort of how to set up some of the tools for using on Curvenote. This will be showing some command line tools and interfaces to deploy a research website, customize it, update that with content, and then collaborate around aggregating and pulling in a whole bunch of other types of content. And there will be questions for Q&A afterwards, but don't hesitate to use the Zoom chat, which Steve will be monitoring throughout, and we'll probably be having some time along the webinar to answer some of those questions as they come up. And just a note, again, this event is being recorded, so if you're not intending to talk, please stay on mute or raise your hand in the Zoom and or send a message on the Zoom chat. Fantastic. Okay, so the sort of first question that I want to ask everyone here is, what do you have in mind when you're thinking about open research websites? And if you could just let us know in the Zoom chat, and then I'll hopefully tailor the website a little bit, or the webinar today, to some of the things that people have in mind. So if that's blogs or courses, or creating open educational resources like books, papers, reports, theses, seminar series, please feel free to use the chat. A Jupyter book, awesome, super cool. So using Jupyter Notebooks to deploy, and so we'll be certainly showing some of that today. Papers and book chapters, lots of that. Not necessarily reports. I think there's a lot of interaction between, or like overlap between reports and papers, and I feel like folks in industry call papers reports sometimes. Awesome. Okay, well, feel free to continue to use the chat, but I'm going to show a little bit about some features about the types of things that we're going to deploy today. And I'm going to start by using Steve's website as a little bit of a guide. And so this is stevepurvis.com. He has all sorts of blog content that he's been writing about. That's actually quite technical blog content with figure captions and code and that sort of information. But he also has a whole lot of projects that he's been working on, including things for computational finance, which have interactive visualizations directly on his blog where people can explore data. And he's also created some interactive papers that he's been writing. And in this case, he's been writing in Curvenote. And this was actually a webinar that we recorded last year in November about a series for writing in Curvenote. And that's, again, using those sort of interactive plots for maps and event timelines where you can explore, in this case, earthquake data for volcanic eruption. And so he was using this to communicate some of the in-progress research that he was doing. And so that's what we're, the type of field that we're going to start to go after today is to create this sort of website from both interactive computational notebooks, as well as article content with things like cross-references and equations and citations. And so where I'm going to start today is with a GitHub repo. And this is a relatively simple repo. It has a Markdown file that has some of the content for my paper in there. There's nothing special about that Markdown. And then for this one, there's a number of notebooks to actually use. And so in this example, I just want to use some of the tools that Curvenote has available to quickly try out what this website will look like. And so if you go to trycurvenote.com and you have a repository that looks like that, you can just paste the URL to the GitHub repository or GitLab repository in there and click the launch button. And this will create its sort of best attempt at a website, given the content that is actually in there. And so that'll take about 30 seconds to actually create a site. And that will give you a link to that site that, again, has done its best job. So here it's actually put the README first, and I might not actually want that. And it's done its best job to put some author information or organization information, as well as some backlinks to the GitHub repository. But it obviously hasn't picked up this sort of author information. And then if we go to this getting started notebook, I want this table of contents in a slightly different order. So this has done a pretty good job, but I'm going to take the rest of the webinar today of sort of how to take this and take sort of the next step into customizing this website, and also giving you a permanent URL or your own custom domain. Awesome. So the first thing to click is maybe this Learn More button, and we're going to install the Curvenote CLI, clone the repository, and start following some of these tutorials. And so there's a lot of documentation on docs.curvenote.com that help sort of walk through some of the things that we'll be talking about today. And there's a lot of reference material for actually things like front matter and ways to actually customize the entire site. And so a lot of the things that I might show might be a tiny bit magical, but all of this is actually well documented on the documentation today. And so I'm going to start with that first step of installing the Curvenote CLI. And so this will fix that link. It does actually get you the site, but it should go to this page. And so I'm going to copy this command of npm install -g curvenote. And if you're not familiar with Node Package Manager, which is what that stands for, this is Node.js. So this is what runs behind a lot of JavaScript applications. And it may already be installed on your computer. If it's not, and you can check by saying node-v, then there are some instructions directly on our site for how to get started. And so I'm going to copy this command and go over to my command line. And I've actually skipped one step in this, is that I actually already have that Git repository cloned locally. So I have my Markdown paper over here with the type of information that we saw, as well as a number of these sort of notebooks that have some interactive Jupyter content. And so if we go back over to the command line and paste that command in, we're going to install Curvenote, and that'll take about 10 seconds or so to actually install. And the -G in this case is saying it is globally available. So if we now say Curvenote -V, this will give us some information about the version that Curvenote is running on. And we can also say -H, as a lot of other command line tools allow you to do, to get some help information. And the command that was run in the trycurvenote.com is basically this init function. And so we're actually just going to say Curvenote init. And our current working directory is this webinar project. And it asks us a couple questions. And really all this Curvenote init does is it's not going to change any of your content. It's just going to walk through creating a little bit of information that we store in a curvenote.yaml file, such that you can potentially sync it to and from curvenote.com, where we have a what you see is what you get editor that's sort of like Google Docs, but built for scientific content. And it also allows you to build and export PDFs. And what we're going to do today is creating a local website and then deploying it to the web. And so I'm going to select using the content and notebooks in this folder, and that will pull in a title. And I'm going to actually say my blog, or I'll say Rowan's blog. And so this has now created the curvenote.yaml. If you saw some movement on the left-hand screen, you can see it there, and we'll explore that in a second. And it's also going to ask us now if we want to start this server locally, and I'm just going to say yes. And what that does is it just now builds that content and starts that local server and gives us a URL that we can use to look at it. So I'll quickly show you that. This is exactly what we had online, minus a little bit of metadata about the GitHub and organization, but we'll add that in. This is already starting to look pretty good. It's super fast to load. It has features like dark mode, which I know some people on the call are excited about. And then I'm going to now start to customize the site. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to actually make it mine. So I'm going to change that logo. And so we're going to jump over into this curvenote.yaml file. And this has a few things in it. It has a site configuration, which has the information for things like the branding and what sort of projects are listed in there. And by project, in this case, if we go back to Steve's blog, each of these is actually a separate project. And we've separated it out that way so that you can easily update some portion of your website without having to update the entire site. And so in this case, we'll open up the site configuration. It has that title, which has been put in there. It's put in some projects, which it's looking to the current directory. There's a navigation list, which we'll show later on in this webinar, as well as some actions. This action, for example, says learn more, and currently it goes to the Curvenote documentation. I'm actually just going to change this and say follow me, and change that to maybe twitter.com and say my piece. When I saved this file, the actual site is updating sort of seamlessly in the background. So it takes a few seconds to update there, or a few milliseconds, really. There's a domain that we're going to deploy to, and a little bit of other information in there as well, and then the project information. Awesome. Okay, so we've, yes, the first thing that I wanted to do is actually change the logo. Okay, so that is currently looking to this public directory, which was created, and a logo.svg. And I'm just going to open this up. I'm using VS Code here, and I'm going to drag from my desktop and drag one in. It's just going to be my face, and we'll say PNG, and we will rename this. Maybe delete the other logo. And when we save this site over here, this is already updated sort of in the background. And so we can start to play around with these configurations and see the changes as they're happening. Fantastic. Okay, so the next piece that I really want to do is actually change this this table of contents on the left-hand side. And to do that, we're actually going to write a table of contents YAML. So that has been auto-generated for us. And so if it isn't provided, Curvenote does sort of the best that it can to figure out your project structure and titles and put those in the table of contents. But we're actually going to write that table of contents so that we can edit it. And so if we say start, we can ask for some help here. And I'm just going to copy the write table of contents command and just paste that in. And then that will start the Curvenote server, but it will have also written this table of contents YAML directly into our project. And so here you can see that the root directory is actually the README, which we don't want. And then there's a list of files that create the section. And this section header is called notebooks. So if we go back over here, you'll see notebooks. And again, this README is what we want to get rid of. And so I'm just going to quickly edit that and copy this guy over there, delete that, and I'm going to bring the index up to the top, mesh, and then I think that's the order that I want. And when I hit save, that instantly refreshes, and we can start to see that this is in a much better order. And I actually want this to say finite volume, which is what this tutorial is about. And so I'm going to go back over to the curvenote.yaml. And in this case, it put the site title, which is what shows up in the URL navigation, as well as the logo text, which is what is shown right there, as the same as this project title. And so I'm just going to change this one to finite volume there. And when I hit save, that has now updated. Fantastic. Okay, so that's already looking a lot more like the site that I want it to be. If we're now looking a little bit at this content, I want to pull out and make this a little bit more important. And there's some information here that this was actually an article, an open access article that I published in the Leading Edge, which is a geoscience journal. And it has a specific license attached with it. And I want to be able to show that across my entire site so that that information is pulled everywhere. And so I'm going to say license, and hit save. And
oops,
when did I
typo? Yeah.
Yeah, I can't license. There we go. Excellent. When I actually spell it correctly, you can see here that there's actually some information about the CC BY license, and there's some alt text and accessibility information baked in. And when you click on it, it actually brings you to the license. And I can, if I want, I can separate out the content. And in this case, the code is actually followed by a different license. So when I say that, that also comes up and says the code is licensed by MIT and the content is actually licensed there. And if you're following this through, you can start to change license information on things like images if they're pulled from different sources, and those will start to show up in your entire site. Fantastic. So we're starting to add that metadata and that rich information There's a number of other pieces that we can add here. The title, short title, the date, authors, DOI. I definitely want to put that DOI on there, as well as the subject and the venue. And so I'm going to add a few more of those. So in this case, the subject is a tutorial. And the venue, which is where this was originally published, is the leading edge. And I'll save that and show you what that looks like. And so that's starting to look pretty professional. And we're going to say open access because we're pretty proud of that, and we want a badge that tells us that this is open access. And so that brings you to some information about open access. And we're also going to put the DOI on, which I can find here, and copy that guy and paste that in. And when I save, that also shows up as an information on the top of our article. So we're really trying to customize it. And then the last piece of customization I want to do before moving on is authors. And so in this case, authors have a list of names. And so I'm the first author on this publication. And when I hit save, we're starting to see some information show up in this top area that's really replacing this text information. And I'm going to save you the trouble of watching me actually type all of this out and paste in a little bit more information about my co-authors and corresponding information and some affiliations as well. And again, all of that information is actually, you can sort of follow this over here. Fantastic. So this has now been applied throughout because I put it on this project configuration. It's not only on the main article, it's actually copied over into all of the other tutorials that we have in this project specifically. And you can see that these ones they know that they're coming from Jupyter Notebook, but they have that information on them as well. Okay.
Very cool. And there's lots of customization options available, and you can fine tune where the licenses appear for different things in your site as well. And just back at our docs site, which is, Rowan showed a little bit, but docs.curvenote.com has a full and growing set of documentation on how to customize the Curvenote YAML and the various places where you can insert sort of front matter in the site. And I think the big difference here is that we're focusing really on making the front matter, the site, and the presentation appropriate for technical and scientific and research publications, as opposed to something that you'll more generic that you might find with another static site generator.
Awesome. Okay, so that's I'm pretty proud of this site now. And I actually want to share it with the world. So it's really hard to share a local host piece with someone. And so we're going to just stop this web server and then say Curvenote deploy. And this is going to ask me a quick question about just to make sure that we know that we're going to be sharing this to a public domain. And Curvenote provides the curve.space domain as sort of a place to share these sorts of articles. And so I'm going to hit yes here. And that's going to go through and deploy the site. So it's gone through and built. You can see there's some information about the linked DOIs. And about 3.5 seconds later, that's actually now deployed live to the web. And we can go, and you guys can go. And it looks like Steve's pasted that directly in the Zoom chat. And so you can go and see that information. And you can see all of these Jupyter notebooks with the nice rendering and information, all already accessible from this website.
And just to note
Awesome.
that deployment is linked to your sort of Curvenote username. It is free, and it is free, fast, sort of CDN-based hosting for what is essentially this static content we've just built.
Awesome. Okay, so the next piece that I want to show is actually editing some of this content and making sure that we easily update it. So one of the things that I forgot to do before I eagerly shared that online is actually remove this, and I want to make this piece a little bit more important. I want to put some references in quickly, and some of those features that were on Steve's blog that I was showing earlier about cross-referencing. I just want to quickly show you how to do that while you're editing locally. And so we're going to jump back over. I'm just going to start up the web server again, which I had stopped when we deployed. And so again, that builds in about a second and then starts the web server. And gonna go back to my local host and just make sure that that's actually still running. And so the piece that we're going to change is, well, start just by removing that byline, which has been actually now codified as data that's more accessible. And so go over to this paper.md, and we can just remove that piece and hit save. And just a quick note on the front matter is all of it is inheriting from the project. But if I wanted to actually make a number of changes, this is quite similar to other sites that do front matter. You can actually define it here as well. And so if we wanted to put the title in, for example, as that, we could equally do that, and that's sort of equivalent there. Awesome. Okay, so the next piece is I want to make this this a little bit more important, and it's not really part of the article. It's actually just sort of a call out that I want to make attention and make it a little bit more important. And so this is introducing a markup format on top of Markdown that's called mist Markdown. And there are some links again in the documentation to do that, but this is using a flavor that is starting to gain adoption in the Jupyter ecosystem. And to do that, we're just going to surround this with backticks like it was code. But instead of calling this code, we're actually going to say that it has another type of flavor to it. In this case, we're going to say it's important, and we're going to save that and show what that looks like. And that actually just creates a call out around that piece of information. And so I'm gonna go through this a little bit fast, and then I'll show you how working in Curvenote in the what you see is what you get editor is also a very easy way to actually create this style of markup without really knowing how to do it itself. So the other piece that I wanted to do is actually associate this figure caption directly with the image. I don't want to number things myself, and I want this figure caption down here to actually be live, so that when I click on it, it actually shows a hover pop-up of that figure. And so this is exactly the same as what we did before, as we surround it in some backticks and we create a figure environment. And in this case, I've installed an extension in my VS Code to actually show me what sort of things are directly available on figures. And it says this has one required argument, which is actually the image URL, as well as some pieces like width and the name of the figure. And so I'm going to copy the image URL up to the top and hit save. And we shouldn't need that figure one, just the caption. And this is what it looks like. Quick fix maybe to the width. If I spell it right, width. And we'll say maybe 60% of the width. And so that's now looking a little better, but it's actually missed that figure 1 information. And so I'm going to bring that back by saying name, and we'll just give it the same name as the actual image. And so now when I hit save, that figure 1 has come back, but now this information is sort of semantically linked to the figure, and the HTML is dramatically improved. Instead of this being an image tag followed by a paragraph, this is now a figure with a fig caption, and so that has all sorts of information that's helpful there. So the next piece that I want to do is actually cross-link this, and we're going to go over into here, and we're just going to give this a little bit more to number this reference. And so that's numref. And if we hit save, we'll quickly see that it actually doesn't know what it's referencing because we haven't given it that information yet. And that information is given by this name here in chevrons. And if I hit save now, that will actually show up. And now when I click on it, it actually knows specifically that it's linked to that information. And so that's old debates about, like, should we include figures at the end of our paper or throughout our paper? This allows you to actually include them wherever you want. And so wherever you reference either figures or equations, you can directly click on them, and that really helps the browsing experience. And so I'm going to quickly do that while Steve summarizes a little bit for the next one.
So great. So Rowan's editing Markdown here, and of course Markdown with those misdirectives sat on top. That's a well documented sort of extension to the Markdown language, and Franklin just dropped a link to the docs in the chat. So in that, those rich directives that you add all these additional things and make these cross references, etc. But of course, now you've got now you're editing locally. You've got the ability to quickly make changes to any existing content, or even just to start new content to start writing in Markdown straight away, and immediately see what that's like on your website. Also, it's not just limited to Markdown, because we've got Jupyter Notebooks in the project here. You can equally be running Jupyter Notebook Server or Jupyter Lab locally or in VS Code or whatever client you're using. And then any updates that you're making and get saving back to disk are immediately again going to be available on your website. So what we're really trying to do is take the step of the difficulty of getting your research work out and into a publishable form on the web. We're really focused on trying to make that and making that as smooth and quick as possible. So you can just focus on the research work and just hit Curvenote start, Curvenote deploy to get fresh updates out.
Awesome. Okay, this is now, I think, something that I can share a little bit wider than the curve.space domain that I have. And so I've done a tiny bit of pre-work here for setting up, deploying to my own custom domain, which is essentially setting the DNS records. But I actually want this on my own domain, which is row.1.ca. And so I'm going to make this a domain. And so the only things that I've done so far is actually allow it to point to the Curvenote service, but there is no site at this URL yet. And so I'm going to hit save on the Curvenote YAML, kill that web server again using the Control-C, and I'm going to say Curvenote deploy. And this is now going to recognize that there's two domains that we're going to be publishing to. That's curve space domain, if we want to keep it, just because it was listed in the domains, as well as this new domain of webinar.row1.ca. And so if we hit yes, this will again upload the entire site, build it, link all of the references, and actually get it out to the world, in this case in 3.3 seconds. So if we go back to the site and hit refresh, all of that information will be there on my own custom domain. And so that's for example, what Steve's site was working on, and he's just using the www.stevepurvis.com.
And this makes it easy to sort of integrate any of those publications into a larger site. There might be a group site or an institution site or some site where multiple things are being pulled together, and then by using DNS, or we can just make that seem like a part of the same web presence.
Awesome.
Cool.
Okay,
Would you then
so
make a project for each publication? Dita's asking. I think everyone's about to move on to that. Actually.
Yeah,
Good timing.
So this is really something that I think a lot of that's really hard to do with a lot of websites today. Is as a scientist, you're often working on one project with specific groups of people, and so there's things like permission management, or maybe you have a GitHub repository for each different publication or project or presentation that you're working on, and you want to be able to easily list all of those presentations on your site as beautifully and easily as possible. And so that's exactly what Steve has done over on his site. Is he has a list of his research projects that he's working on, and this project has specifically been written in Curvenote. So I'm going to show you what that looks like in the Curvenote ecosystem. So this is the writing project, and I can come in here and I can edit the actual Markdown. And I just want to again sort of reinforce that it's that missed markup that we were using is a little bit difficult to learn for the first time, but it's quite easy to do things like cross-referencing figures over in Curvenote. As you open these commands, or you maybe know just one command and say figure, link to a figure, and then that's sorry, I clicked on the wrong thing. That brings up this this figure information, and then I can click that, and that has all of the cross-reference information baked in there. And so I want to be able to include this paper along with all of the interactive plots and notebooks directly on my website, so that people can find it when maybe they know about me and they want to see my publications. And so I want to be a little bit more in control of that experience, especially if I'm showing off my academic portfolio. So I'll hit save. Again, there's a whole bunch of collaboration that's built in terms of commenting and notifications to allow you to write in this experience. But in this webinar, I'm just going to be showing the inclusion of this paper that has already been written directly into my site. And so I'm going to go back to the command line, and I'm going to say Curvenote clone, and just paste in that link that we were working on and hit enter. And this will ask a couple questions of just where to bring that content locally. And we'll accept the default here, which puts it in a content folder. And then that will take a few seconds to actually pull all of that content locally. And so if we explore what that is looking like in the browser window, we can see that there's a whole lot of IPython notebooks. There's the paper.md, which has that change that we actually just made in the what you see is what you get editor, with all of the cross-linking sort of all filled in for you. And a lot of this is editable. And again, you can see that there's a lot more information and front matter that's already filled in for you. Awesome. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Curvenote start locally. And that is looking at the local host. And in a second, that will come up. Awesome. So now that Curvenote clone has automatically put something in this navigation bar, which I want to edit a tiny bit just so that I have both projects directly in that navigation to start with. And so we'll come back to our Curvenote YAML over here and look for this nav piece. And we're just going to copy this and paste it in. And in this case, this is a URL. And so we can look at what the URL is. And right now it says my webinar blog. And I actually want it to say pixels maybe, because this is the article is called Pixels and their neighbors for a finite volume technique. And I'll hit save. And that brings up 2 pieces of information. And in that change, I also changed the URL that we were landing on. And so that's La Palma earthquakes and the finite volume. And so these are 2 projects that I've written independently, and I'm starting to bring those together directly into my site. And I could maybe have an overview page, and maybe I have a section that is research or papers. And then I'm just going to nest these under a children and show you what that looks like, and hit save. And that changes the navigation into a dropdown so that we can have all sorts of research that we've listed, and actually all of the information that's allows people to get up to speed with your project. And that can include things like these interactive plots of maps from La Palma, as well as the timeline of earthquakes in this case, or the depth and magnitude of those earthquakes. Fantastic. Okay, so this is something that I also want to deploy and share to the world, and this is going to take a little bit longer, I think. And I'll let Steve summarize while this is uploading.
Sounds great. So that's it. I think the one barrier that a lot of people hit when you're trying to work and publish with others on this is the different mediums that different people working can sometimes be a challenge. And what Rowan just saw there was a way to aggregate content. So in this case, Rowan here, somebody who's looking after the main site, happens to be working in locally and being able to deploy, but then they're able to actually go out and put in another project from somebody who wants to work in a WYSIWYG or via a UI to do their writing. And that scales up. So with the permission system in Curvenote, you're able to actually take this from being a single sort of person's website to being able to aggregate content over a team or a wide collaborative project, and be able to bring updates from all that work together really easily and get them out. And Rowan showed us adding a subfolder or sub-project here from Curvenote, but it doesn't have to be that way. They could also be additional GitHub repos if you have collaborated with other people who are also working in Markdown. So the point being, it's very flexible to be able to aggregate content like this. And what the aim is to be able to create larger open research websites, small scale journals, much more easily, and to be able to provide sort of modern infrastructure to do that. It includes computational content.
Awesome.
Great. I think one thing we're probably not going to look at, but the maybe final step that would be next is, of course, this is on GitHub. So there is a GitHub action to automatically also deploy this on commit. So Rowan could easily now go and hook that up on his repo and just do a commit and push domain and be able to update and deploy his website automatically, should he wish. And
to your question, Chris, Steve had previously given access to me for this project in Curvenote, and so I had edit capability in here, and that can be completely private, and so you can click the private piece down here, or the share piece, and that allows the project owner to share that with whomever they want while they're keeping that draft private. Okay, so that was a lot, but I'm just going to quickly summarize some of the pieces that we've seen today. So there's all sorts of things like cross-references becoming hover tooltips and really improving that reading and browsing experience. Again, some of the ways to create that information is through mist Markdown, or you can use the Curvenote editor to sort of bring in citations and cross-references quite easily. And that really adds that rich information that allows this renderer to pull that back and forth. And that information can also come from scholarly sources. So we saw a tiny bit about DOIs being sort of magically appearing as reference sections directly in our paper, but that can expand to things like RIDs in the biological literature and ORCID information and RORs. And so these are community databases that are pulling in and curated by the scholarly community. And of course, working with notebooks, this is a core part of what Curvenote allows, is copying and pasting these links between your Jupyter notebooks and showing those interactive pieces in the URL. And so you can literally control copy on one side and then control paste on the other, and comments and versions stream back and forth between those two pieces. And then the other piece that we didn't show today is that you can also hit export to any one of our hundreds of journal templates. And because we've sort of semantically structured all of this information, it can be formatted in a number of different ways, as well as this interactive website that we went through today. And one of the pieces that I'm really excited about in terms of getting science out of PDF documents and Word documents is the ability to add this sort of interactivity and rich information directly into the browsing experience, especially for things like educational resources or tutorials where you can actually play with the information and explore it before you actually have to download anything. So those are some of the conclusions today. Is really trying to help you guys get your science and research out of PDFs and share it faster, more interactively, more reproducibly, and more collaboratively, and really communicate your work in this beautiful way and really share it as fast as you can. So I will now open it up to some questions. If you want to sign up for curvenote.com for the writing experience, you can do that. The docs are at docs.curvenote.com. Anyone attending this webinar, you can have 6 months free on the Pro plan. The only thing that I showed today that was on the Pro plan is that custom domain deployment where I put it on my own website. Just sign up and send us a note. And if you're hosting a journal or a community or a lab group or a data repository, please do get in touch. And I will leave it there and open it up for some questions.
Well, thanks very much, Rowan. Just raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question or anything like that. Just while people are thinking. Also, remember, just try.curvenote.com if you've got a GitHub repository and you just want to see what it looks like. Feel free, use that service and get started. If anybody's got any questions, just unmute or raise your hand, whichever you like. Oh, Dieter, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering, let's say you have your own, or you have an existing website and you would like to integrate a chapter, a paper, you name it, into that website. How easy is it to theme a Curvenote deployment to adjust it to the existing website, let's say?
So right now, the theming is certainly somewhere where we are not as advanced. We've been focusing on the content presentation primarily. So that's something that will come in the future for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So right now it's primarily the light and dark modes, and really focusing on trying to make that as accessible as possible.
Yeah. Cool.
Just out of interest, what if you had a website in mind, what is it currently in? Is that plain HTML or is it a Markdown based site that you've used?
The question was general.
Okay.
I have old static HTML site generated. I think it is Pelican. I haven't touched it in a long time. But the question is, would I have to rewrite everything, or could I well, more or less nicely implement just a new section that wouldn't look completely out of place of everything else that is already there?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's the common thing that I've heard from so many people, is that at one point they were super excited and got a website out, and then 5 years later they haven't ever updated it.
It's not just that, it's the same thing I think with Curvenote. Let's say I get super excited and just crumble the next week down and translate everything to Curvenote. Will it be the same in 5 years? And it's just there, and I need a pro account to have it running on my own domain, but I haven't touched it in. It's always the same problem, right?
All of the format that we have is it's all using open standards. So that spec.mis.tools is something that we're working with the executable books community to actually turn that into more of a standard behind that. And so I think that this will have a long lifetime. So from that perspective, hopefully that's at least one of your concerns.
Yeah, I'm sure something will come up, because for me to have the static website was also to have it as stable as possible, but I think I cannot run, because everything updated in the ecosystem, I don't think I could reproduce my website unless I install probably Python 2 and God knows what, but yeah.
Yeah, I think we've been quite close to, for example, if you for example had Hugo or Jekyll with like some of the Markdown driven stuff already as a way that you were getting your content out, that would probably build immediately, and then probably wouldn't be too bad to then customize into something to get the content sorted out. I think it's the same case with Jupyter Book. We've imported a few different Jupyter Books now as well, and they also render with some kinks that we're still working out, because Sphinx has a lot of flexibility.
I think that was also the same direction. My other questions, if you accept Sphinx gallery style notebooks, because I think many projects move to the plain Python files that are then rendered by Sphinx gallery. So if you can read those, that would be cool.
Okay, I wasn't clear on those. Maybe Ron, you've seen them. They're not the Jupytext notebooks, or they are?
No. There's some extra work there. Yeah, so I think those are the types of things that we want to make as easy as possible. I think the steps that Curvenote's doing is really to try and add that scholarly metadata, and also try and take the steps so that it's not you creating your personal website and a documentation site and a scientific paper, but those tools are much more fluid for you to move between them. And I think, or our goal is that that's easier for you to keep these sorts of things up to date and integrated. And one of the things that you're like paying for with a private domain is for us to take on some of that maintenance burden, so that those can stay up to date over time. And I could maybe show you a little bit about the difference between this and a static site. Is actually all of the information here is stored as an API. And so I can just end with a .json, and this allows us to actually look at all of that front matter information, as well as actually all of the content information that's now as data, instead of that sort of HTML block that's really quite impenetrable for to reuse. And so this is the technique that we're using to make sure that this actually can be updated over time. And so it's all data rather than a PDF for for that side. Any other questions from folks?
Question just on the recording. Chris asked, we will send out a link, an email shortly after this, once the video is processed, etc., with a link back to that recording. Definitely. Great. And yeah, just some folks mentioning that it is great and they'd like to start using it. Again, we're happy to, help out and onboard anybody and help anybody get started. A good way to reach us is by support at curvenote.com. Obviously comes through, but we also have slack.curvenote.dev, which I'm just typing in the channel, is our Slack channel, and we're always available on there by a DM. That's a really quick way to get a hold of us.
Yep. I think one of the things that I'm very excited for is to help pull this sort of scattered information across lots of things like GitHub repositories into these sort of centralized places by communities. So this is the Software Underground community, for example, that's showing a whole bunch of tutorials from throughout that ecosystem and really presenting them in this reader browser friendly way, without the authors of that information having to work in any different way. Fantastic. Okay, well, thanks again for joining, and we will be in touch over email. And again, don't hesitate to reach out to any of us about any questions.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Rowan. And thanks everybody for